August 26, 1903. The South African Bushveld. Dusk is falling over the vast, wild expanse of what would one day become Kruger National Park. A lone man on horseback pushes through the darkening Thornveld, miles from camp, miles from any other human soul. His dog trots faithfully at his side. The last orange light bleeds out of the western sky. Shadows pool between the trees. And somewhere out there in the gathering dark, something is watching him. This is the story of Harry Wohlhuter, a man who survived the impossible, a man who did what almost no human being in history has ever done, and lived to tell the tale. But to understand what happened on that August evening, you first need to understand who Harry Wohlhuter was. Because this story isn't just about one terrifying night. It's about a man forged entirely by the African wilderness. In 1901, Wohlhuter was appointed as one of the very first game rangers of the Sabi Game Reserve, the precursor to what we now know as Kruger National Park. The reserve had only recently been proclaimed, and it was in a lawless, fragile state. Poaching was rampant. Ivory hunters, meat hunters, and opportunists moved through the bush with near impunity. Wohlhuter was one of a tiny handful of men given the enormous task of patrolling millions of acres of wilderness with almost no resources, no backup, and no roads. His tools were simple: a horse, a rifle, a knife on his belt, and the knowledge in his head that had been accumulating since boyhood. Life as a ranger in those early days was nothing like the modern profession. There were no radios, no vehicles, no organized response teams. If something went wrong out there in the bush, you were on your own. Wohlhuter understood this. He accepted it. It was simply the nature of the work, and he loved the work. By 1903, Wohlhuter had already established himself as a formidable ranger, methodical, fearless, and deeply committed to protecting what little wildlife remained after years of unregulated hunting. He had handled dangerous animals before. He had tracked wounded buffalo through dense bush. He had stared down threatening elephants. He understood the rhythms of the wild, and he respected every creature that moved through it. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what August the 26th was about to deliver. On that morning, Wohlhuter broke camp near a place called Enwanesti in the northern reaches of the reserve. He had been on a research patrol to the Olifants River, checking the area for signs of poaching activity, monitoring game movements, doing the painstaking, unglamorous work that was the backbone of early conservation. His destination that day was Metsimetse, roughly 20 miles to the south. He was traveling with a small group, a few donkeys carrying equipment, and a handful of African police constables on foot, but the group was moving slowly. Too slowly. The miles were grinding past, and the sun was arcing toward the horizon at a rate that made Wohlhuter uneasy. So he made a decision. He would ride ahead alone, pushing on to camp to prepare, with only his horse and his dog for company. It seemed like a sensible call. He knew this country. He had ridden it dozens of times. A few miles on horseback as the light faded was nothing he hadn't done before. But the bush at dusk is a different world. If you have ever stood in the African bush as the sun sets, you will know the feeling. The shadows thicken. The air changes. A kind of electric tension settles over the landscape. The predators feel it. They wake up. They stretch. They begin to move. And for a lone man on a horse in the fading light, the bush becomes an entirely different proposition. Wohlhuter pressed on through the twilight, riding south. The trees closed in around him. His dog jogged alongside, nose working the air. And then, as he crossed a dry riverbed, the dog stiffened, started barking hard, with urgency, at a dark shape half hidden in the vegetation off to the right. Wohlhuter peered at it. In the failing light, shapes play tricks. His first thought was that it was a reed buck, a common antelope, the sort of animal that would bolt at any moment. He barely slowed his horse. Then the shape moved, not away, toward him. That was wrong. That was not reed buck behavior. Before the thought had even fully formed in his mind, the animal burst from cover, and Wohlhuter saw it for what it was: a lion, a full-grown lion charging directly at him out of the dark. He yanked his horse hard to the left. But a horse and a lion are not an equal contest in close quarters, and the lion was already in the air. It slammed into the horse's hindquarters, claws raking deep into the animal's flesh. The horse erupted in panic, bucking and bolting with every ounce of its terrified strength. He looked up. The lion had released the horse. Chased by Volhooter's furiously barking dog, it had abandoned the attack on the animal, and the horse had bolted into the bush. The dog was still going, still barking, still chasing. Volhooter started to collect himself, tried to get his bearings, tried to figure out where his rifle had gone. That was when he heard it, movement behind him. He turned just in time to see the second lion. There had been two of them all along. While the first had hit the horse, the second had waited. And now, as Volhooter lay dazed and alone on the ground, it saw its opportunity. The lion sprang. It landed on him and drove its teeth into his right shoulder. Not a swipe, not a rake of claws, but a full bite. The killing grip of a predator that intended to drag its prey away and feed. The pain was enormous. The weight of the animal was crushing. And before Volhooter could react, the lion began to move, dragging him backward through the scrub into the deeper darkness. What followed was one of the most remarkable minutes in the history of human survival. Volhooter did not scream. He did not thrash or fight blindly. He kept his head. Even as the lion hauled him across the ground, his face pressed against the animal's chest, heels dragging over stones and roots, he was thinking. Coldly, clearly, impossibly thinking. He remembered his knife. He always carried a sheath knife on his belt. It was a habit, a ranger's habit born of years in the bush. He reached down with his left hand. His right shoulder was clamped in the lion's jaws and useless, and began to feel for the knife. His fingers searched the belt, desperate but deliberate. The knife might have been knocked loose in the fall. It might be gone. If it was gone, he was dead. His fingers found the handle. He gripped it the way, as he later wrote, a drowning man grips a floating plank. But he didn't stab immediately. Even now, even in this moment, he forced himself to wait. He could not afford to miss. He could not afford to wound the animal and enrage it. He had one chance. So he felt the lion's body against his own, estimating the position of its heart, calculating the angle of his strike. He could not see. He was working entirely by feel, by instinct, by the knowledge accumulated over a lifetime in the wild. After about 90 yards of being dragged, the lion paused. It had reached a small tree. It released its grip, perhaps adjusting its hold, perhaps preparing to begin feeding. Volhooter moved. He drove the knife in, once, twice, deep into the lion's torso, then a third time into the neck. The lion recoiled, leapt backward, and for a breathless, suspended moment the two creatures faced each other in the darkness. A badly wounded man and a badly wounded lion, each taking the measure of the other. Volhooter let out a yell, a raw, full-throated shout, and the lion turned and limped away into the bush. Without thinking, running entirely on survival instinct, Volhooter scrambled for the tree. He clawed his way up into the branches, his right arm nearly useless, blood soaking through his shirt. He knew he was losing blood. He knew that if he passed out and fell from the tree, he would be dead. So he reached into his pocket and pulled out a neckerchief, and with his good hand and his teeth, he tied himself to the branch he was sitting on, so that even if consciousness left him, he would not fall. And then the first lion came back. The one that had attacked the horse, discouraged from its chase by the relentless barking of Volhooter's dog, had followed the blood trail back through the darkness and now circled the base of the tree, pacing and watching. Below him, Volhooter could hear the dog keeping up a frantic, brave defense of its master. From somewhere in the bush, he could hear the second lion, the one he had stabbed, groaning as it died from its wounds. He sat in that tree and waited, bleeding, feverish already, tied to a branch in the dark with a lion circling beneath him and the African night closing in around him. Minutes passed. It may have felt like hours. And then, voices. Lantern light, perhaps. The sound of his men coming along the path. He shouted. They heard him. The lion slid away into the darkness. His men found him in the tree, pale and soaked in blood, and helped him down. The group set off toward Metsi, still 8 long miles away. And for much of that walk, they could hear the remaining lion tracking them through the tall grass, padding along in the dark, parallel to the path, watching them go. Eventually it gave up. Eventually silence returned. When Volhooter finally stumbled into camp at Metsi, his ordeal was far from over. The camp had no medical supplies. Nothing could be done for the wound, which was already festering. By morning, he was running a fever. He ordered his men to build a stretcher from branches, and they began the 2-day journey by litter to the nearest town, Kamataport. When they arrived, the district surgeon was away. Delirious, barely conscious, Wolhuter was put on a train to Barberton. He arrived at a hospital nearly 3 full days after the attack. His shoulder was lacerated to the bone. His arm was black and swollen from blood poisoning. The doctors dressed his wounds and, privately, did not expect him to survive. He survived. Harry Wolhuter made a full recovery, and when he was well, he went back to the bush. He went back to his patrol routes, his horses, his knife on his belt. He continued to serve as a ranger in what became Kruger National Park for the next 40 years. 40 years. As if nothing had happened. The only lasting physical reminder of that night was a stiff shoulder and the faint, permanent ghost of a scar. He earned a nickname from the local Swazi people he worked alongside, Lindanda, a name given with deep respect for a man who had proven himself in the most fundamental way the bush demands. The lion that Wolhuter killed with his knife, the skin was preserved. The knife itself was preserved. Both are on display today in the Skukuza Library inside Kruger National Park, where visitors can see for themselves the modest blade that saved a man's life.